द वे फॉरवर्ड इज ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਮੁਲਕ ਦੀ ਰਾਜਨੀਤਿਕ ਬਣਤਰ, ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟ ਪੋਲਿਟਿਕਸ ਤੇ ਕਨਸਟੀਟਿਊਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਇੱਕ ਲੀਡਿੰਗ ਅਟਾਰਨੀ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਅਰਨੈਸਟ ਬੂਨਾਕੋਰੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਜੱਜ ਵੀ ਹਨ। You're welcome, Mr. Buonocore.
Thank you, Harjot. Nice to be with you.
Mr. Buonocore, we are a community of recent immigrants, and many of us did not go to school here. And there's something we missed. That was a class on civics, which would teach us the history and basic principles of this society. I welcome you here today, and I would urge you to teach us, to tell us what are those principles on which this great nation was created. But first of all, tell us something about yourself.
Okay, well, I am an attorney. I have an office in the Bronx. I've been practicing for 25 years. I'm also a judge in Suffern, New York, where I live. And I have 4 children. And they're the light of my life, and as you can imagine.
And Mr. Buonocore comes from a family of Italian immigrants, is that right?
Yes, that's right. Interestingly, my grandfather on my father's side came over when he was a young man, and he found work here. He was driving a garbage truck, and that was just about all that he was, was able to work and do those sorts of things until until he was able to make it better for his children, my father, and my grandmother, for them to allow them to go to school, and they worked their way up through the public education, and they went to college, and then of course. My sisters and my brother and I had even greater opportunities, and I was fortunate enough to be able to graduate from college and go to law school and even run for a judge.
And that's an American story.
Yes.
Can you tell us something about the circumstances in which this country was created, and what is it that you would call the founding principles of this country?
Sure. Well, we recently celebrated the 4th of July. As you know, that is the birthday of America. That was the day back in 1776 on July 4th when the Declaration of Independence was signed. And the drafter of the Declaration, that was Thomas Jefferson. He was given the task of recording what many in that community were feeling, and that was the tyranny of Britain. Don't forget the American colonies.
America was a colony of the British.
Yes, and it was had been a colony for approximately 150 years or 200 years, and they felt that they were unfairly treated. Right? That they needed more rights that the King George was not providing. The phrases are taxation without representation, and they didn't have a say in the government. All of the local judges were beholden to the King George. They were when people were accused of crimes, they were extradited brought back to Britain to be tried, and they didn't have access to a fair system.
Fair judicial system.
And so they had no rights at all except those that were granted to them by the king. And so this revolution began to take hold, whereby they believed men such as Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, who's referred to as the father of the Constitution. He felt, and they felt that they had to fight against this tyranny, and they believed in individual liberty. In the Declaration of Independence, it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. The text talks about being endowed by the Creator with inalienable rights, and this was a concept that really heretofore had never been tried.
So there are many new ideas, novel ideas, which were presented at that time, and which we see leading to this great document, the Constitution of United States. Will you shed some more light on those principles which were new at that time? We now take the whole concept of democracy for granted. That's why it's important to keep remembering what was those principles for which men fought, and this unique system was created. One of the first things that led to this great revolution was the concept that the rights are not given by the king. Correct. Every person has some inherent rights. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, and as it states in the Declaration of Independence, that each of us are bestowed rights by the Creator, whether you believe in a particular God or particular faith. It didn't matter. It was that the concept was that our rights were not given by the king and were not bestowed by other men on other people, but they were inalienable. They couldn't be taken away, and they were bestowed on the people. And then the people turn around and give rights to the government. So the government is empowered by the people, not the other way around.
All right. So if in layman terms, if we have to understand this concept, so what would happen earlier was there was a king, and he would give these special rights, whether by creating knighthood or whatever, right? Like in Europe. But this thought said that every human being has certain rights.
Yes.
And these rights do not come from king. It just happens to be there just by the fact of a person being alive, a person being a human. Now, whether it's a religious concept that it comes from some creator, nature, or whatever, but just by the fact of being a human being, you have those rights which cannot be taken away.
Correct.
And what are those rights?
Well, again, in the Declaration of Independence, they outline the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Okay.
Of course, there's no guarantee to happiness, but we're all free to.
That's why they use the word pursue it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, you mentioned how something interesting. Of course, initially, America was also founded upon the toil of slaves, right? And of course, they were not considered human at that time. They were not considered equal, and that is one of the great travesties of our founding. And it is as enlightened as these people were, and as educated as the founding fathers were. Many of them owned slaves, as you know, and it was a stain on their existence, and it was something that many of them knew was wrong. Yet it was an economic system that they couldn't do without. Thankfully, eventually, Africans were given certain rights. They were recognized, of course, for our brothers and sisters, and that wrong was rectified. I mean, this is a great experiment, the United States, and it has many wonderful aspects to it, but there are also
shortcomings as well.
Of course,
we are making improvements as time goes by.
As we go.
As we go. This concept, the founding principle, all men are created equal. So slavery is an exception to that.
Sure, and women weren't included.
And women rights as well.
That as well.
I understand it was in 1920s that the women were given an equal right to vote in this country. Is that right?
Suffrage, yep.
Suffrage. Liberty is individual liberty. Is a cornerstone of the founding principles, right? Can you explain to us what is the concept of liberty?
I think it's most easily understood as freedom from oppression of the government, that I should be entitled to do what I want so long as it's not affecting you and burdening you. That means practice my own faith a certain way. It means pursue whatever career I want to do. And as you know, here in the United States, we have that unique opportunity. And I think that's what led to the prosperity that we have, the innovation that we have in the United States. Individual liberty and limited government, they sort of go hand in hand. I'm not... The founders didn't believe that you should have no government. Government has certain rights and certain responsibilities, mostly to protect the rights of the individuals, and also things like that individuals can't do themselves, like a standing army and provide for the general defense and things like that.
But the founding fathers were very clear on this, that they wanted a limited government. Jefferson said that I don't believe in good government, I don't believe in efficient government, because bigger the government, it's always oppressive. A government always becomes oppressive if it gets too much power.
Right.
Is that right? But at the same time, James Madison said that if we won't need any government if men were angels, and that's not the way it is, right? We will talk about this further after a short break. The way forward is ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਅਰਨੈਸਟ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ। ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਦੇ ਪਏ ਕਿਨ ਪ੍ਰਿੰਸੀਪਲਸ ਤੇ US ਕਨਸਟੀਟਿਊਸ਼ਨ ਬਣਿਆ ਔਰ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੁਲਕ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਚੱਲਿਆ। ਮਿਸਟਰ Buonocore, the concept of limited government, I think a lot of credit goes to Benjamin Franklin for creating those juntas when they were not satisfied with the kind of services their government, which was the British government, was giving them. And they, rather than accepting the situation they were in, they said that we should get together and improve our own condition. And that was an experiment which led to the thought that government is not required for every aspect of your life. There are things that you can do yourself. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. He created these juntas, and they were an opportunity for the citizens to get together and discuss the politics of the day and what was required of them and what was being demanded of them by the crown, the British crown, and those were sort of seed beds of ideas for this notion of limited government and individual liberty. James Madison, as the father of the Constitution, he's the one that came up with this idea of the separation of powers. And so everything that the founders did, they were trying to prevent a tyrannical government from taking over. And as you had mentioned earlier, the idea is to, as the government just grows, and we see that happening. Today in our lives, we have far more restrictions on us now than the original founding of the country. Every law that's created, every regulation that's created, we're we're here in Queens. The city has its own laws. The state of New York has its own laws. Of course, we're also subjected to federal government laws in this right here as we sit. And so we are constantly losing our liberties in tiny increments, really. And that's something that they were very aware of and that they wanted to prevent. And the separation of powers was a way to, in the U.S. Constitution, was a way to keep the government in check, right? Separation of powers, meaning that there are three branches of government. First of all, there's the legislature, which makes the laws. The executive, that's the president. The executive enforces the law. And the judiciary, the judges, apply the law.
So there are checks and balances on each form of government.
Sure.
Power.
The legislature creates a law. The president has a power to veto it if he doesn't like it. Then again, the legislature can override the veto if they can get enough votes for it. The legislature, the House and the Congress, has the authority to do investigations on the executive branch. We see that now playing out with President Trump and the various committees that are investigating whether or not he had ties with Russia. There's also, of course, the judiciary. The judiciary keeps a check on the legislature.
I'm sorry, and we have seen these recent examples, like the Trump government proposed this idea of having the citizenship question in the census, and the courts turned it down.
Yes. That was a question that was on the census for years and years, but it was dropped.
1950.
Yes, it was dropped in the 50s, and he sought to reinstate it. His administration. Wilbur Ross is the director of Commerce.
Secretary of Commerce.
Right. And it was at his instigation that that question was added. That was the topic of a recent Supreme Court case. I think it was Secretary of Commerce versus State of New York, which essentially said, interestingly, they didn't say, no, you can't have that question, but they looked at the motives of Secretary Ross, and they said, this doesn't seem to add up. It doesn't make sense. What you're saying as to the reason why you want that in there.
And now they've asked the government to come up with a better reason for why you want to do that.
Yes, they've sent the case back down to the trial court, to the district court in New York. And maybe that question will be on the census if the administration can articulate a meaningful reason for having it in there. So Secretary Ross had said that it would help the Department of Justice better enforce the Voting Rights Act. But his actions didn't really bear that out. Apparently there was question of whether or not that was really his motive. That's a very, it has raised a lot of, having that question on the census has raised quite many issues.
We will go into the politics of that another time, but now, you see, it's very easy for people to call ourselves the oldest democracy, and but they fail to realize what a new concept, concept of a representative government was at that time. It's revolutionary. Can you tell us what was going on at that time with this concept of representative government?
Right, sure. And as I'm sure your audience knows, Harjot, here in the United States, we're not a democracy, right? Democracy is often referred to as mob rule. So a democracy is 51% of the people vote a certain way, and that's what happens. Here in the United States, we're a democratic republic. A republic is a confederation of states.
Okay.
And in fact, that was very important to the founders, states' rights.
Yeah, the concept of federalism.
Exactly. When I think federalism, I think states' rights. They didn't consider themselves a United States of America when the 13 colonies sought their independence.
Okay.
They were really a confederation of states, and each with their own militias and currency. Some had their own currencies and their own identity. However, this concept of federalism, which is again like a sort of a strength in diversity, strength in numbers. The individual states with their own.
It's a unique system which respects and let the states keep their own identities, maintain their cultures, and at the same time come together as one nation.
Exactly.
And this again was a unique feature which said that the central government, the federal government, should have limited power. All powers should lie with the states, and only the powers that are not defined can be given to the federal government. That's the 10th Amendment.
Right.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. The whole concept of the Constitution, you have to remember, it's a negative document. It says it doesn't grant the rights to the people. It says what the government may not do. The people, and by extension the states at that time, had unlimited rights. And again, always thinking about keeping tyranny in check, they wanted this Constitution to prevent the federal government from becoming this Goliath. And
I think this concept is very important for everyone to understand. Usually it's the Constitution that gives various rights and powers to people, to individuals, right? But the Constitution of US said every human has certain inalienable rights, right? That Constitution does not give those rights. That those rights come to that person from the Creator, right? And then they created a document which is called the Constitution, which would put limits on how much it can violate those rights.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Exactly. Congress shall make no law abridging free speech. That's the First Amendment, or part of the First Amendment. It always talks about what the government may not do, rather than granting what's permissible for individuals to do.
Another concept, which I don't know how unique would that be, but a very important concept was a concept of owning private property. It was believed that no one can take another's property, fruits of another person's labor. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, in fact, that is probably the hallmarks of the prosperity that we see in the United States. That private property, meaning land, but also the fruits of your labor, the government cannot take them away. You have rights of ownership, and then there's the takings clause in the Constitution, which says they can't be taken away by the government without just compensation. So they're protected, but let's say you own a house that's in the way, and they want to put a freeway through that. The government must give you the appropriate value for your house if they need that, and explains, articulates some need before they can confiscate private property.
And besides that, it defines the difference between a capitalist society and maybe a communist society, a socialist society where that they might not have rights to private property. And here it was believed that every human has a right to his own property, and no one individual should take the fruits of labor of another person. I wonder if the debate around taxation, sometimes some people just hate the idea of being taxed. Is that one of the fundamental principles behind that protest?
Well, I think it's understood that you can't have certain services without taxation, right? The government has to have some funding, but I think the issue with taxation is that it becomes all-encompassing and that it gets out of control. And so it'd be nice not to pay any sales tax or any income tax, but the society needs to function, and so there's got to be a balance.
The other concept which I believe is the hallmark of the Constitution and the whole idea of the rights in this country is the Bill of Rights, right? Can you tell us more about Bill of Rights and the freedoms that it aims to protect?
Sure. Again, the purpose of the Bill of Rights. Remember, the Bill of Rights were not in the Constitution originally. They felt that about 20 years later, the Bill of Rights were added, and they felt that they needed to be more specific in controlling the government. For example, the First Amendment talks about the freedom of speech, the freedom to practice religion. It says that Congress shall make no law establishing a religion or the free exercise thereof. There's a huge that's interesting. There's only a few lines in the First Amendment about religion, but there's a great debate that has raged since that time.
Mr. BUONOCORE, we will speak more about this particular freedom after a short break. ਸਾਨੂੰ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ. The way forward is ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ. ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ. Mr. BUONOCORE, the Bill of Rights to me is the most interesting document defending individual liberty, freedoms anywhere. Is that right? And it extends from the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. Can you tell us what does it defend in all those amendments?
Yeah, sure. It is a miraculous document in that it limits the power of the government. Again, getting back to that same thing, the founders wanted to avoid tyranny. So the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law abridging free speech. So the state, the legislature cannot stop me from speaking my mind, because when I speak my mind and I gather people around and I can talk about and I can criticize the government, that is the beauty of these United States. We cannot be punished for that. We can also practice whatever faith we want to. Congress will not establish a religion, nor will it prevent me from practicing the religion that I choose. The Second Amendment, of course, the Second Amendment, we think about the right to carry guns, right? Well, the whole purpose in the Constitution of the Second Amendment was to provide for a well-ordered militia so that if you needed to take up arms against the government, you could do that.
Excuse me. I think that is something unique. I don't know if there's any other government in the world which encourages its people, allows them to have guns, to be able to stand against the very government that's giving them that right.
Yes.
I think that's something unique. But is that the way it has been interpreted always? Do you mean that people are allowed to have F-16s at their houses?
That is a good question. Most people don't understand the Second Amendment. Most people don't understand that it is the purpose for fighting back against the government. These days, we have many millions of people, 300 million people here in the United States. Perhaps we don't have some people do not have the discretion or the respect for human life or the other people, and unfortunately, you get crazy people who do awful things. But if you stand on the principle and the purpose of the law, yes, you should have the right to have an F-16, because the government certainly has F-16s and greater firepower. So it's a good debate worth having, for sure. It's not for hunting, you know. It's not for sports shooting. It's for taking it's for preventing the government from taking your belongings and your family away and your own self away. That was the original purpose.
So that's a very critical debate, and I don't know how far it can go if there can be billionaires having nuclear weapons of their own in their backyard to confront the government at any time. I don't know how much the government is going to allow that. We might have to go back to James Madison when he says people are not angels. We have to keep that in mind.
The rights continue.
Yes, the Third Amendment.
Third Amendment we don't hear about any longer because it just doesn't come into play, but it was the government can't be forced to house soldiers in your house.
Yes, again, and that comes from that pre-revolution time again, when the Britishers, I think after 1774, they housed all the soldiers in every house in New York.
Right. It was a way to brutalize the citizenry, to keep them down and to keep them from acting out. And they continue. The Fourth Amendment, the government may not conduct unreasonable search and seizures in your persons and in your property. You know, as a judge, I sign search warrants all the time, but they have to be based on probable cause. The police come to me and they say, we have this evidence that so-and-so is hiding a weapon in his home, and we would like to go in. And, you know, I review all the facts and make sure that if that there has to be probable cause that a crime is being committed before I will give them the authority to enter the house.
So there's a complete defense of our individual liberties, of our freedoms. Mr. BUONOCORE, I personally believe the repository of democracy, of rights, the power going down to the citizens is the concept of local self-government in this country. Tell us more about how this self-government works.
The three branches of government are not only for the federal system. In my own locality, we have a mayor as the executive branch. We have trustees. They are the legislature. They make the laws. And we have the courts. So it's played out on every level, not only the federal government, but it's the same in every state, in every county.
And all these positions are elected offices?
Yes, nearly entirely. I myself ran just this past November, and I was fortunate to be reelected to a 4-year term. The terms are different. The legislature has a 2-year term, much like the federal government, but that allows the people of my village, the village of Suffern, to come out, to go to local meetings, their voices are be heard. There's always an opportunity for the public debate. They are invited to come up to the stage. I'm talking about it in these monthly board meetings, the village board meetings, and be heard on certain issues. Of course, ultimately, the citizens, the voting public has the right and the authority to elect their representatives, right? If I didn't do a good job, I will not be reelected the next time it comes around, and that's true for the legislature and the trustees. And Harjot, that repeats itself on every level of every government, from my village right up until the federal government and the Congress.
It's an amazing system, and how does it work? What is a petition? Where does it start from?
A petition is merely a paper that is carried, that I carried. It's a way to get on the ballot. You have to seek the approval by signature of members of a particular party to be on their line.
Mr. BUONOCORE, we'll take a small break, and we'll keep talking about this after the break. So, dekhte raho, the way forward. The way forward is थोड़ा फिर तो स्वागत है असी गल कर रहे हैं आज US Constitution दे बारे Mr. Ernest BUONOCORE दे नाल Mr. BUONOCORE, I understand that along with being a judge, you're also into private practice. Is that right?
Yes, I have an office in the Bronx. I practice injury law, mostly specializing in construction accidents, people getting hurt on the construction site or falling from scaffolding and things like that.
I understand there's a lot of protection, particularly in New York, for gravity-related injuries.
Yes, New York has specific laws that protect workers under certain circumstances who fall from a height or who have materials that should be hoisted properly that fall upon an injured worker. So any gravity-related injury has a special application in New York State. And under the right circumstances, the fault of the worker is not considered in that situation.
We will talk more about that in our coming editions, but we discussed the founding principles, our constitution. We just excuse me, want to discuss a little on how these principles work with our current politics or our contemporary political history. Lots of people in this country, particularly on the Republican or the Libertarian sides, feel very strongly for state rights. There was a lot of opposition to the civil rights movement, which gave rights to the black people in this country, along with some others, which are the basic human rights that this country protects. But despite that, excuse me, there was opposition on the pretext of state rights. I personally don't think there would have been an end to slavery if the federal government had not intervened. And there would be no civil rights if, again, the federal government would not have made this strong legislation. What do you think?
That is true. The federal government has stepped in those two situations. And of course, most recently, our lesbian and gay individuals can now marry each other here in the state of New York and throughout the entire land. That was a landmark case that was recently overturned just 2 years ago. It's true that the federal government has stepped in and protected rights for certain individuals, but many argue that it goes too far. For example, the most issue-driven idea that we have is abortion. You know, of course, you know, Roe versus Wade said that a woman has the right to an abortion up to a certain time of the pregnancy throughout the United States. Many pro-life individuals will argue there is no such right found in the Bill of Rights or in the Constitution, that it was really one that was created by Justice Brennan, who I believe wrote the opinion, that he himself talked about having to stitch together ideas from different amendments of the Constitution to create that right.
I think this is one of the most contentious issues in the country right now, and I understand that Roe versus Wade is not just about abortion. It's about individual liberty, right? The various rights. And I think it's a fundamental, is it not a fundamental liberty for someone to decide what do they want to do with their fetus? Is the government, should the government be deciding? And is religion a factor in that? Is there a state religion that you're creating by advocating that position?
There is a religious factor because many faiths believe that life is sacred, right?
So should there be policy based on that religious faith?
Well, we all have laws against murder of adults, so it's a question that we wrestle with here in our culture, in our society. You talk about states' rights. Pro-life individuals don't want any abortion, but a step toward that would be allow abortions in the state of New York and California, but if a state like Mississippi doesn't want to have abortions, they shouldn't be forced under Roe v. Wade. Their community should come together and say, we don't want abortion in our locality. That's federalism. That would be an example of federalism.
But we look, there's a Bill of Rights against which any state law is seen. So if there's a state law which violates that basic fundamental liberty that the U.S. Constitution protects for every individual, whether in New York or in Mississippi,
sure,
they have a right to that freedom.
But Harjot, the Roe was based on the science at the time and said you can only have an abortion up to the first trimester. Now we know that fetuses or infants, if you will, in the womb have feeling and react and have a heartbeat and are able to live outside the womb at a much earlier age. So it's an interesting dilemma.
It's an interesting dilemma and a very big debate, which again will need an entire segment on.
Sure.
Mr. BUONOCORE, I think it was a lot of novel and unique and new ideas that this Constitution was created with, this country came up with, but sometimes I feel that there are certain sections of the society who have again got stuck. It's not that the ideas that were new 300 years back have to remain like that for the next 5,000 years, or next 2,000 years. So from time to time, with the needs, case in point being the role of government in businesses. I believe President Reagan refused to have an industrial policy. And as a result of that, there were at least a few industries identifiable. Japan, gained advantage in the auto industry. There was semiconductor industry. There were several industries which countries outside US took those benefits because of our government's position that government should not get into this and will stay away. I think times have changed. Times keep on changing.
But in opposition to that, Harjot, look at what happened with regard to the solar industry under President Obama. You remember the failed company Solyndra? There was the government choosing winners and losers in the technological field of alternative energies, and they all went bankrupt because there wasn't a demand for them. tremendous amount of money, government incentives was wasted. Solyndra doesn't exist anymore. And some would say that was because it was the government trying to force a particular outcome rather than letting the market decide.
But hasn't the government created a whole industry with this green energy that we're talking about, and US leads the world, or it's on its way to become the world leader, and it's technology of the future?
Yes, it is. However, it wouldn't happen without government dollar incentives. If I'm going to put solar panels on my roof, I'm only going to do it because I'm going to get a tax rebate from the government.
We can't completely overlook the role of the government. I think government played a very important role with building a middle class after the war with its GI bills and all.
Sure.
I think the government plays a very important role in our education. Right.
Sure.
And there's a debate which should carry on, which will carry on. But I just hope that we take reasonable approaches and be guided by the founding principles. We should never steer away from our founding principles, but we have to accept the changes as they come. Mr. BUONOCORE, it's been a pleasure talking to you. It's been a very informative session, and we hope to have several more of these sessions and learn from you about what's happening in this country.
My pleasure, Harjot. Thank you very much.
ਇਹ ਸਨ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਅਰਨੈਸਟ ਬੋਨਾਕੋਰੀ। ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਫਿਰ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ ਦ ਵੇ ਫਾਰਵਰਡ।